Ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to the virtual chapter for November 2024. We've almost made it through a whole year, Karen. We are 11 months in at this point.
It's just amazing, isn't it? I mean, it goes so fast.
Mhm.
It goes so fast.
Yeah. And by the way, do you like pot pies?
Do I like pot pies? I like a pot pie every now and then. It's winter, of course.
But not TV dinners so much.
No, I don't like TV dinners.
And do you have a favorite brand of pot pie?
Um, you know, I guess if it was on the market, I guess Mrs. Fields is probably okay, but there's a little shop in our area and they make pot pies. I buy theirs, buy several of those and freeze them and have those.
Yeah. We can't have pot in Florida.
Well, I know you just
I
voted
just
it down, but I
I
live
just
in
thought I'd mention.
Illinois. It's
So
very
so
illegal here, my
so
friend.
so we make chicken pies and beef pies and such things. But anyway, so one of my favorite brands though is Swanson, and then there's that other one. You know.
Swanson.
No,
Yes, the other one is Banquet.
I set you up to set me up. And speaking of banquets, Karen, guess guess
I
what's
know.
guess what's coming up next month?
The the holiday banquet. And if you guys don't know, it's a really cool thing that we do on the second Tuesday of December. We get a bunch of hypnotists together, usually about a dozen, and everybody gets a short time to give us words of wisdom, do a process, lead us in something, teach something, or entertain. It doesn't matter, whatever they choose to bring to the holiday banquet. So that's coming up next month.
We'll have about 10 featured speakers, and each of them is featured for about 5 or 6 minutes. Maybe it's a little bit longer than that, but it turns out to just dividing up an hour for a whole bunch of quick things. And so a lot of fun, and and we pull out the stops and bring all of our get all of our good friends here as well. So hope you'll join us for that on December 10th at this very same time and batch channel. So you'll find it just as easily 1 month from, well, 4 weeks actually from
Yeah.
today on the 10th of December.
Do you
And do you have announcements, by the way?
I really don't. I'm doing something at the Elman Cafe the 19th of January, I think, but nothing coming up till then. Do you have things still the rest of this year to teach and
Well, as a
pass?
matter of fact, this month on November 23rd and 24th is the Certified Stress Management Consultant Training. So if anybody has an interest in that, we got a pretty good class going right now. We got like 14 people scheduled as of 2 days ago. So,
Is that
so
live and in person or is that on Zoom?
it's on Zoom from 10 to 5 on Saturday and Sunday, the 23rd and 24th. And what we're going to do about it is we're going to learn some stuff about stress. We're going to learn some techniques for managing stress and for sharing with other people. And you'll leave with an understanding of how you can put together a 1 or a 2 or a 3 hour or a 1 or 2 day seminar or workshop on stress management as well for use with corporations or or on your own on your own or however you like. So it will is always great fun. Stress is just one of the most exciting things to talk about.
Not to have, but maybe to talk about. Okay, I'll give you that.
There's never been a good movie that doesn't have an element of stress required in order to make it so, right? So
Well, that is absolutely right. I was just contemplating that if you need stress to make something successful, what are we doing relaxing people all the time?
yeah. Well, I'm learning how to be stressed and relaxed at the same time.
Okay.
Stressful relaxation. And that leads me into what I'm going to talk about in a few minutes. But anything else that we want to share?
I don't think so. I'm looking around the gallery tonight, and I just want to thank all of you for joining us. Some of you we haven't seen for a while, and it's wonderful to have you back. And thank you for joining us tonight. It's good to see everybody. Everybody on the recording, thanks for joining us too.
Yeah, and by the way, I did push the recording button and I am recording, right? I don't know why
Yes,
it
yes,
doesn't
it's
seem to
recording.
say it on my screen somewhere. Oh, there it is.
Yep.
They've just changed my screen. That's all. Every little modification that Zoom makes throws me for yet another
Yes.
interesting loop. Well, okay, so then yeah, thanks everybody for being here. And Dennis, I can't see you on my screen right now just because of the configuration that I'm in, but I'm so glad to know that you are COVID free and here with us. We had an interesting time a few months ago. So what I want to talk about is I was watching something on TV the other day, and it took me back to an experience that I'd had a few years ago that I'm just going to give you the headlines because this is a story I've told 100 times probably, and most of you have heard it. But one day, I literally had the idea in my head that the sky was falling. The sky is falling, the sky is falling, the sky is falling. And I said this to my friend Jamie Smart in the UK, and Jamie said to me, Michael, you're just experiencing the effects of your thinking. And I got to tell you, of all of the different things that I've experienced or moments of insight, I think, that I've had in seminars and workshops and all kinds of things, somehow or another, Jamie got me at exactly the right moment on exactly the right day. And it was a revolution in my mind to understand that mindset is the key to whether or not you're going to have a good. See, we're all interested in doing everything right and or better or whatever all of that is. But in the long run, it isn't how things are that matters so much as how you think they are. Wes was talking about who am I, and I said, yeah, who do I think I am? The experience that we have is the result of what it is that we think about something. So two people can look at the same thing, as we certainly noticed, last week in the election, with different criteria, and consequently have different ideas about what's good or right or appropriate, or any number of things. We all have different worlds that seem to be constructed out of the way that we think about things. So anyway, I had that. That's just a little aside for a moment. I was watching the Tube, and there was a woman being interviewed who she had four very significant things. She had a 13-month-old. I'm trying to remember. I might not be entirely accurate on the statistics. 13-month-old, a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old, rather, I believe, and a 5-year-old, and metastatic breast cancer. Now, these four things came together in a very interesting way for her because she said, given the circumstances and the lack of support system that I had around me, there was only one choice for me, and that was to adopt an attitude of irrational optimism. And I heard the phrase irrational optimism, and it just echoed inside of my head. I did a little bit of a search, and I found out it's not unique to her. There's some limited material out there about the idea, but irrational optimism. And I don't know why, Karen, I think that it's a especially useful thing to talk about this week. Because the idea about being able to look to the future optimistically, even when that doesn't seem to be a rational response. So no matter how it is, so what a wonderful idea, even when it doesn't seem to be a rational response. It's easy to be optimistic when everything is going your way. And anybody can do that, right? That's the elementary level course, but we are advanced, students here. And when we're challenged or the odds are against us, hope can go a long way to keep us moving forward. So in our community, for example, we've got a whole lot of people that are various ages and amounts of experience in the profession, and some people just starting out. And you've got to know that 4 out of every 5 businesses, you know, there's all of these statistics that say starting your own business is really not an intelligent idea. The odds are against you, and it usually doesn't work out. And it seems to me that it isn't rational to expect success, but only those people who expect it, who demand it, and who create it are really likely to succeed. So I was thinking about this, and I thought I've got to watch the clock carefully because I don't want to, certainly don't want to run too far. But I was thinking about this in terms of what a wonderful opportunity to create a program or a seminar or something, or something more substantial. And I just started putting some ideas together. And here's what I've come up with. I would say, first of all, that sometimes the greatest strides in life come from being from believing in possibilities that others can't see, or from refusing to let setbacks dictate our future, and from clinging to hope even when logic might suggest otherwise. So this is the world of irrational optimism. And it isn't blindly ignoring reality. It's about cultivating a mindset that sees opportunities and challenges, that believes in the power of resilience, and that feels energized by dreams, regardless of whether they fit the current picture of reality. So, so here's why irrational optimism is useful. Y'all can understand in our profession, right? And especially if it's about the business of building a business for yourself. Obviously, it's useful. If you want to be an entrepreneur, I think I think you need some of this. You know, you need the way to be optimistic no matter what it is that's going on. So what it does is it boosts resilience. You know, when we believe that things will work out, I've got to make sure I stay on the camera. I see cameras and angle. There you go. Maybe. Somebody. When we believe that things will work out, even against the odds, we're more likely to persevere through difficult times, through difficult experiences. So this type of optimism fuels resilience, and it gives us the strength to push through setbacks that might otherwise discourage us. Then it enhances problem solving because optimists are better problem solvers because they believe that there's always a solution to be found. Rather than being overwhelmed by challenges, they're motivated to look for creative solutions, often succeeding where others give up. Every once in a while, I think it's interesting if we look at life and our experiences as a puzzle to be solved. You know, here's the situation, and groovy. What can we do? You know, to move it to the next place. It attracts opportunities. People who radiate positivity often attract others who enjoy their energy, and this can lead to unexpected opportunities, collaborations, and connections that might not have materialized otherwise, and it increases happiness and well-being. I mean, look, if you've got the choice between feeling like the sky is falling, you know, and something else that says, "Oh no, the future is bright and there are possibilities available to me," which one would you rather have? And the interesting thing is, obviously, this is a choice that you have. So the question is, how do you get it into your life? And you know, to do all this in a very short period of time is an interesting challenge for me. But one of them is, of course, just those things that so many of us have done in workshops and programs, or that we probably have done with our clients, where you invite people to get to create a vision of their ideal life. You know, this simple idea of where would you like to be in a year or 2 years or 5 years, you know, or 10 years, and let them really see it and experience it and step into it and enjoy it, enables them to create a robust set of representations that can allow them to get some of those good, you know, good chemicals working for them that can keep them empowered and moving towards their goals. Um, let's see, what else? Reframe your challenges. Okay, I remember reframing is an interesting thing, you know. So yeah, what else could this mean? Is an interesting idea. Something that I remember is we did this exercise in NLP training that was with the Andreases, and the exercise was that's good because, you know, and fill in the blank. So somebody might say something like, "Well, I just got my two front teeth knocked out," and you could go, "Well, that's good because you know you can use a straw without opening your mouth." You know, or something like that, you know. No, that's great, you know, but seriously, you know, there's something good to be found in everything, in just about everything. You know, I'm not really a devotee of the Abraham teachings, only because I don't really know hardly anything about them. But there's one thing that I did learn, and I just heard a tape or something way back when, and I still remember, is that Abraham suggests that when you find yourself sort of stuck, for lack of a better word, that you might ask yourself, what is it about this moment that is wonderful? And here's the thing, if I'm out here on I-4 and the traffic is backed up, you know, there's been an accident or something and nobody's moving, and I'm just sitting in my car, particularly if it's in the middle of the summer, I could be looking at my watch, thinking about where it is that I'm supposed to be and when I'm supposed to be there and what's going to happen if not there. And finally, I can get myself to a place where I'm sleeping in a box underneath the bridge because, the future has unfolded so badly for me. Or I can recognize that, hey, I am sitting here in my car. The air conditioner is working. I've got my tunes on the box, some comfy leather seats. Oh, I just got to sit here. That's all. And I can have a pleasant enough time with that if I allow myself to appreciate it. So this idea of not just reframing, but maybe even daily gratitude practice, identifying things to be grateful for and or journaling or the various things that people can do. That certainly will help to maintain this attitude. But I also thought, there's got to be an NLP technique. There's got to be an NLP technique. And it seems like the best NLP technique would be to model somebody who's got this, right? And you get the information about how they put it together and how they kind of run their brain to do it, and that's great. You can replicate that, or you can synthesize and make some generalizations, maybe from a bunch of people who seem to be optimistic, and discover a few things. We know in NLP, of course, that submodalities make a whole lot of difference, right, in terms of how an experience impacts you. So we can make sure, by the way, that when we're creating those bright futures, that they are in fact bright futures. If brightness is the submodality that works for us, for example, or colorful, or whatever it else is that we need. But then once we get something that allows us to get access to that sense of possibility and wonder, then to try to find some way, maybe by using the swish technique, some of you are familiar with that, to hook it up to those places where you're really going to want and need it. Or you can just get a simple anchor, and this is maybe the easiest one, the reframing anchor. That is to think of some time when you really, let me see, how do I describe it here? I actually have this written out. I have a new technique. So a past situation when you faced a challenge or a setback, but found a way to overcome it, found a way to move beyond it easily and comfortably as possible, and visualize that. Close your eyes, bring it to memory so it's full and vivid, recalling how you felt, the actions that you took, all of the stuff that was involved with it, and what that was like for you, and get a good anchor to that. Now, depending on how you get the anchor, you could. So there's a whole lot of thumb and first finger people, out here in our community, and that certainly would be one way to do it. There's another way to do it. You can pull it down. You can literally pull it down from the sky. One of the things that I like to do is just create an image of it, an image that evokes it, and send that out to just hide it way off in distant space somewhere and begin to consider when and where do I really want to be able to call on this superpower of optimism. And when I think of a place or a time or a situation that if this should happen, that's when I would really want it. I create an image of that. I send it away and I bring in that optimistic image and experience the change in my physiology. And I can relax it for a minute, and then I can do this just a simple little exercise, right? I can think, well, when else would be a really good time to have this? Now, by the way, it's really interesting because you notice in the question, when would be a really good time to have this, presupposes that the having that in that time will be the thing that will make the difference. That's a really powerful hypnotic suggestion, just right in the center of the technique. So all you have to do is just generate as many scenarios as you can think of, knowing that you're going to be able to overcome them. Bring the pictures to mind, send them away, and bring in that resourceful, ideal, optimistic, irrationally so self, and feel the good feelings. And my sense is if you do that often enough, you will create associations between those experiences and the feelings associated with that class of experience when you really are going to want to have the power of irrational optimism. And then the next thought might just be, I feel optimistic. All things are possible for me. I can do whatever it is that I choose. I can move forward, even in this situation. These are lovely, lovely ideas to me. Now, so then, of course, other things that you can do just in terms of, I said daily gratitude. That would be a really nice technique. Using affirmations. Some of y'all are affirmation people, put them around where you can see them, and just remind yourself multiple times a day. Oh, by the way, I didn't mention it. It just occurs to me now when I said multiple times a day. Some of you know the quantum focusing technique that we got from Michael Elner and Alan Barsky, which is I live with a happy heart and a playful spirit and a peaceful mind. To be able, multiple times throughout the day to access that. And if you do it enough, it becomes nature. There's a point when you don't have to do it. That's the programming it in. But once it's there, you've laid that track down and it can carry you through difficult situations. And then, of course, celebrate small wins. Start celebrating everything you do that constitutes success as you think about success in such a way that you find more opportunities to do that. And you recognize as you look over your life, I've had celebration after celebration after celebration this week. And that's because I have succeeded at something and at something else and at something else. And success is what I do naturally. So, and then just final thoughts on this topic, because how did we do? Oh, good. Thoughts on this topic. I would just say that there's nothing more that can make life any more exciting than the capacity to just dream big. Give yourself permission to dream the biggest dream that you can dream. In fact, maybe a dream so big that if you only get 10% of it, you'll have gotten so much more than you had expected earlier. That to me seems like a great way to go with it. So those are my thoughts about irrational optimism. And so optimistically, I share them with you.
And don't we all have that resource? It's a beautiful resource. You talked about being an entrepreneur, and we all had to have that irrational optimism to even go into this business to begin with, right? If you've ever gone into a relationship, most marriages fail. That's the statistic, but
Yeah.
still
Or
using
bought a car.
what?
Or bought a car.
Yeah, all of that.
Right?
Um,
We step out in faith over and over and over again. And when we can do that in the faith that things will be well and enjoy the sense of things being well as we're doing it, that's just a wonderful thing.
repetition will create that readily available skill. You have to remind yourself, all of us look both ways before crossing the street, right? Because when we were little, our parents grabbed our hand and said, look both ways before crossing. And then they added some emotion to it. A car could kill you. They did it enough that it became a habit. Repetition works. So if you make the intention, set the intention to change the way you look at something, to change the way you feel about it, if you do it enough and remind yourself to do it enough, you're going to one day go, wow, I could have had a V8, or I could have had that awful old feeling that I used to have and I didn't.
Maybe you just won't even notice because you'll just feel good and it won't occur to you, right? So one of the things about repetition that in these last minutes that I'd love to say, because specifically as it relates to the swish pattern, and I know that this is something that I've said to several people here probably before. You all probably are aware of the fact that on my telephone is every Beatle track that has ever been recorded in the history of the Beatles. And I know them all, by heart. Not only that, I knew them when they were on vinyl. I knew them when the songs were in a sequence and one song followed another. And I put them on my turntable and I played them over and over and over again until I learned what the play order was of all of these albums. Not consciously, not deliberately even, just by repetition. And now to this very day, which has got to be 50 years, more than, oh my God, more than 50 years after the end of the Beatles, If I hear a Beatle track on television or on the radio or anywhere else, and there's just a moment of silence at the end of it, the next thing I hear inside of my head is the beginning of the next track. So if you teach yourself that this feeling of confidence follows that idea that this could be a problem, and you connect those things together so often that the next time you find you're in a place where this could be a problem, you don't even stay there long enough because you already know what the next track is. That's pretty cool.
We're hypnotists, for heaven's sake. We ought to be doing this for ourselves, right?
Yeah. We're hypnotists for heaven's sake. Oh my God.
Or the devil made me be a hypnotist.
So that's a calling.
Either way, it works out to my advantage. At least one of us who does this regularly is a little devil or a little witch, and the other one is an angel. So you get the best of both worlds when you come to the virtual chapter.
Yeah. Well, I think the Pope is a hypnotist for heaven's sake.
Well, maybe. Maybe, or for the bank account's sake. I'm not sure which, but we're not going to go down that rabbit hole now, are we? Okay.
Speaking of bank, that's the first part of the word banquet.
Yes, it is.
That
Yes, it
brings
is.
us that brings us full circle, Karen.
Yes. And so please join us next month at this time for the holiday banquet. It will be amazing. It always is. It's really
Bring your own
wonderful.
pot pie.
Bring your own whatever. You can have beverages. You can have whatever your heart desires. A charcuterie board is always appropriate for the banquet. So do it upright. So let's get to what we came here for tonight. Jeffrey Richards talking about empowering your clients with NLP. Jeffrey's pretty cool. You know, some people call him Jeff, which I think is appropriate because he signs things Jeff. But for some reason, I call him Jeffrey, and I hope that's okay with you, Jeff.
That
He
is perfectly okay.
Okay,
That
I
which
don't want to sound
also,
like your mother. I don't really want to sound like your mother here. So I may shorten it a bit, but Peak Performance Hypnosis, Columbus, Ohio is his business. He's been a professional hypnotist since 2000, but he's been helping people through hypnosis since the 1980s. I'm guessing that's because what we do is hypnosis, is it not? So I'm going to be honest with y'all. I just moved my iPad, which has Jeff's bio, and I've lost it momentarily. So I'm going to come back and tell you more about Jeff in a moment. But while I find that well-constructed bio so that I can read it to you, I should have printed it. What I will say is Jeff did NLP before hypnosis. He really started out with NLP. So what got you to NLP, Jeffrey?
Well, what got me to NLP was a bad job review. Um, I had just started working at a new job. I had moved around the country a little bit after college, as a lot of people do. I'd always intended to move back here to Central Ohio. I like it here. We have everything that you could possibly want. We may only have one, but we have everything that you could possibly want right here. And so I moved back up here. I had got into a long-term temp situation, finally got a job at a magazine, was having a good time there. And just some HR nerd stuff. They were on a calendar year model for reviews. So everybody got the review at the same time, no matter how long they'd been there. I'd only been there a few months. I get my very first review from my boss, who had been in his job only about a month longer than I'd been in mine. And he told me basically, you're good at your job, but people hate working with you. They think you're a jerk. You need to take a class on how not to be a jerk. And this is the only group of people where I can shortcut this story because it's a fairly straight line for most of us to figure out how learning how not to be a jerk leads one to NLP. For people who don't know what NLP is, that's a much longer story. So you may be the first group of people I've ever told this story to this quickly.
so NLP is a community created by jerks who overcame it.
At least half of that is correct. Yes. What I discovered, having jumped through all these hoops to figure out what class I was going to take, was that, in fact, people did not think that about me, that this was the review my boss himself had received before he gave out all the ones to the people under him, I guess he assumed, well, that can't be my fault. I'll just blame everybody else. But I wound up taking after he got fired, I wound up on my own taking this. It was a class by Rex Sykes, who is 90% retired these days. Yeah, I've reached that age where people ask me who they should train with, and it's like, well, there's Rex, but he's retired, and there's Steve, but he's retired, and there's, you know, Anne, but I don't know where the hell she is. And it just goes on and on and on. And eventually it winds up with, well, I guess you should probably take classes from me. But I took this 4-day class from Rex called, I always screw this up one of these days, I'm going to memorize it correctly, How to Get People to Do What You Want Without Nagging, Pleading, Guilt Tripping, or Whining. I don't think that's correct exactly, but I like my version better. And it was NLP, it was some other stuff. And this was my very first time being exposed to anything like this. And I was having a great time. The idea that you could systematically approach communication in a structured kind of way that you could model and learn and teach was mind-blowing to me. Little side note here, where I went to college didn't have minors. If they'd had, mine would have been psychology just by the load that I took. And I did a paper early on about Timothy Leary's work before he got mired in all the psychedelics and everything, and how he had come up with this sort of graphical way of representing interpersonal communication. It's this chart that looks almost like an enneagram. And so this kind of made sense to me. But this was back in the days of the 21-day practitioner program. And if you didn't live someplace where they were doing those, you were kind of out of luck. I lived in Columbus, Ohio. I was kind of out of luck. But I met a couple of ladies, and I wish I could remember who they were because, Karen, you probably know them. They were from Chicago, and they were the ones who told me, well, you know, a lot of NLP stuff comes from modeling hypnotists. And it's like, well, maybe I could learn that until I can get around to learning more NLP. And I found that more or less just up the road from me in Detroit, it's about 3.5 hours each way, was Infinity Institute, which was founded and run by Ann Spencer, the woman who founded the IMDHA, along with some other people. And so I would drive up there. They were doing it on weekends. So it worked. I would drive up there on Friday. I would take classes Saturday, Sunday, drive back home, forget everything that I learned, drive back up the next weekend. And I did that for like 10 weeks. I'm in the heartland. It's tough to find people to practice with here. I mean, it was impossible back then. It's tough now. But I got certified. Had a piece of paper, said certification on it. I must have been certified. And I saw a bunch of people. Nobody died. And I got, as far as I know, and I got more into this sort of one-on-one helping people stuff, but all the while was still chewing on the NLP thing, wound up ultimately doing the big Paul McKenna thing in London. This was back when he was working with Michael Breen, and Richard Bandler was there, did my practitioner there, did my master practitioner up in Canada with a man named Steve Boyley, who's also 90% retired, and met some cool folks along the way, studied with Michael at Hypnothoughts a couple of times, and I see several familiar faces here, hi Janet, hi Alan, it's good to see all you guys. Of course, Karen, who, God love her, we're both running down the hallway in opposite directions in Chicago a couple of weeks ago. And she said, hey, can you do the virtual chapter next week? I said, yeah, I can do that. We'll talk a little later. And that was how I wound up here.
We put it all together, however, and look, here we are. Is NLP just wide awake hypnosis?
Well, let's back that up a second, because NLP is defined a bunch of different ways. NLP is just the study of subjective experience. It's when we start getting into some of the things that we do as we study that subjective experience. Is it wide awake hypnosis? Kind of, sort of, yes. I am good friends with our buddy, the Transderivational Search, which is, and for those of you who haven't studied NLP, on behalf of all of us who have, I'd like to apologize for the jargon that we use to describe perfectly normal stuff in NLP. I think that we should just like carry around like glossary sheets whenever we talk to people. It's like, here, I'm going to be using these words that normal people don't use. Trust me, they make sense when you know what they mean. But to just go inside and to take two thoughts that you've never stuck together before and stick them together, in that moment, you're not here, you're here. And while I wouldn't necessarily call that hypnosis, I would call that an hypnotic experience. So close enough for jazz. You don't need trance to accomplish a lot of the stuff that we do. I use it. It's fun. It feels good. And if you can teach your clients how to relax, you're probably solving half their problem right there. So trance is great. Do you have to have trance for there to be change? No. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. Really kind of depends on where you're at, what's going on, and what's appropriate in the given moment. That's what I think anyway. Your mileage may vary.
All right. I will tell you that I got an assist from Michael, and I have the rest of your bio. So I want to tell them a little bit more, go a little deeper about who you are.
All righty.
He's a master practitioner, you already know this, and licensed trainer of neuro-linguistic programming through the Society of NLP. That's another thing that we could talk about. The society, there are lots of organizations.
Yeah.
Which has also fractured, I think, NLP a little bit. He's certified by the International Medical and Dental Hypnotherapy Association and the International Certification Board of Coaches and Hypnosis, ICBCH. He's certified as a hypnosis instructor through ICBCH. And in addition to operating a full-time hypnosis practice, Jeff presents comedy and transformational hypnosis entertainment for the public and for private venues. And he's a founding instructor of Kenton Knepper's Silent Influence Academy. Now, I wanted to find this because I wanted to share this brilliant line that he has in his bio. Whomever wrote his bio came up with this closing line, and I love it. Jeff lives near Columbus, Ohio, with a very nice dog and a bunch of dust bunnies that will rip your throat out if given half a chance. Now we know more about Jeffrey Richards. And so one of the things you promised us tonight was empowering your clients with NLP. What the heck does that mean?
Well, where do I start? I think the best place to start is by pointing out something that Mark Cunningham, spaced on his name there for a second, that Mark Cunningham once said to me, and he said that the only reason why any hypnotist ever has any business is because there's no listing for witch doctor in the phone book, which gives you an idea of how long ago he said that to me. Because
that was my Halloween costume, by the way. I go as the witch doctor every year with a hypnosis shirt.
I'm glad that you said that, because immediately I was picturing you in a Yellow Pages costume, which would be really creative but difficult to get through doorways. So I think of these things so you don't have to. But anybody who comes to us, almost anybody who comes to us, every once in a while you find somebody who knows that hypnosis can help with their problem. And as soon as they recognize they have that problem, they go looking for a hypnotist. But by and large, we're not anybody's first phone call. We're not the first thing they tried. If you work with smokers, you know this. That's the big thing you got to overcome with smokers and with a lot of people who come to us, because they're coming to us dragging a trail of failures behind them. Nothing they've done up to this point worked. I mean, that's just sort of self-evident. Otherwise, they wouldn't need us. And when we're able to say, you came to the right place, and I'm going to show you that immediately. I'm going to prove to you that you've got some stuff that you can do that you're already doing. You're just not doing it consciously. I'm going to show you that you do have control over your thoughts. You do have control over your feelings. You do have control over your behaviors if you remember to do a couple of things. And I present all of this as a safety net. This is stuff that you're learning now. By the time we're done working together, ideally, because you can't promise results, ideally, you're not going to need to do any of this stuff. You're already going to be kind of doing it unconsciously, but you can do it consciously too. And I show them just a couple of techniques because, like I said, people who come to us, they are so desperate for help. Some of them are just coming to us to go through the motions so they can tick this off the list. It's the last thing on the list before they can just give up and stop trying so hard and just learn to live with whatever problem they have. And probably most of us have been there at some point or other. I mean, I've never met a single one of us who got into this profession so we could say, hey, everybody, look how mentally healthy I am. I don't think that that's really the accurate way of looking at any of us or any of anybody, really. So I take some time. The way that my session structure works is that I work with the exception of smoking cessation. I work with the client to start for 4 sessions. The first session is 2 hours. All the rest of are 1 hour. They're scheduled a week apart. And the first session is longer because I'm going to ask a few questions, but my discovery call before somebody signs up as a client is pretty comprehensive. I understand basically what the issue is going on with them. So I'm going to get a little bit more information about that. And then I'm going to teach them 3 really quick sort of submodality play things that they can do to take control of the pictures in the head, the voices in their head, and the feelings in their body to start to feel more resourceful. And once they're able to do that, and once they're able to sort of understand the theory behind all this stuff, a lot more stuff begins to make sense. They start to realize, oh, wait, everything I've been doing has been to protect me in a twisted 5-year-old's understanding of the world kind of way. All these things that I've been doing that have been causing my problems, if I remember to do it, that's the hard part, isn't it? You were talking before about how, we're hypnotists. We should be doing these things for ourselves. That's the hard part, remembering to do it. You need somebody to hypnotize you so you won't forget. When you remember to do it, you can make some really big changes. Then I take them to 3 things really quickly. We move some pictures around. And I have them take a picture of somebody that they dislike and make it smaller and dimmer and further away. Take away some of the sensory data of that image. We're not changing who's in it. We're just changing the way the picture looks. And ideally, doesn't always happen that way, as I discovered earlier this evening, ideally, the feeling the person has about this person changes as you change the picture. If it doesn't, you've learned something important about that person, because a lot of hypnotic language is visually based, whether we mean for it to be or not. I mean, heck, the word imagine comes from the word image, which suggests seeing. We don't really make that connection at a logical level anymore, so imagine's kind of safe to use. But if you tell people to see something and they're not good at seeing stuff, you're just giving them another thing they haven't been able to do successfully. And while we're on the topic of that, just for a second here, anybody who works with a client who is stressed or has anxiety issues, and you get them into the chair, and the first words out of your mouth are just relax, you've just handed your client another opportunity to screw things up, because that's what they're there to see you for. They can't do that. Stop telling people to do that when you know they can't. I mean, they can, they just don't know how. You're going to teach them how. You're going to show them that they can, but in order for them to believe you, I was talking about Rex Sykes's class a while back, and I won't go into the details, but one of the things that happened during an exercise there, I had you break up into groups. You've got your operator, your subject, and your observer, or the person who gets to take the bathroom break, except that sometimes the observer position isn't completely bogus. And this was one of those times, because we were doing a thing, and the operator was taking somebody through a positive experience that they didn't really know anything about. And things were going pretty well when they were being sort of artfully vague. I love that term. And as things were getting better, they got a little confident, got a little cocky, and they started putting a little bit of themselves into the description of this event, which was not meshing with this person's memory. This wasn't really the way they experienced it, and it popped them out of the state they were in. And so I learned really quickly that one of the things that you really should be careful about when you're working with a client is, if you're going to be talking about how things are right now, you need to get that right. Because if you're not talking about how things are now accurately, the unconscious mind isn't going to believe you when you're talking about how things are going to be in the future. If you're talking about how you can feel comfortable driving down the road in your red Miata and they drive a blue Ford Focus, that's going to confuse them. That's going to pop them out. You're going to have to recover from that. You've wasted an opportunity. So if you're not able to match them where they are in terms of being relaxed or their lack of ability to do so, it's a thing that's going to cause them to lose trust in you. After all, you are one step above a witch doctor. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I also studied with Jerry Kine, and we can go into the whole necromancer story if we have time for that. But I had them move some pictures around. I asked them about the way that they ask themselves questions, because that's a biggie. Not everybody, but a lot of people are taught to ask themselves, when they do something and they don't get the results they want, why did I do that? Or what did I do that for? Or my personal favorite, why am I so stupid? And when you ask yourself questions like that, you will give yourself answers, and they are never kind answers.
For no good reason.
For an excellent reason, because you were taught to do that. You were taught to do that by an authority figure who was looking to get out of responsibility for your screw up. Mm-hmm. Because, when you're a kid, you screw up. You don't know anything. You understand even less, and you don't know that you don't understand or know anything. And so you try things and you learn. They say experience is what you get when you don't get what you want. And so you get lots of experience when you're a kid. You get a lot of experience when you're new at anything. And at some point, some authority figure comes over and says, "What'd you do that for?" And the honest answer to that question is, well, based upon my understanding of the information and the information that I had at the time, it seemed like the thing to do. That is the accurate, honest answer to that question, but it is never the acceptable answer to that question. The acceptable answer is, I didn't try hard enough. I didn't pay enough attention. I failed in some sort of personal, intrinsic way. I'm a moron. And once you've debased yourself sufficiently, the authority figure says, well, don't do it again, and they leave. And we learn that that's how these things work. Fast forward to when we're an adult. There's no authority figure there. It's just us, and we screw up. And so we ask ourselves, why'd we do that? Well, we know how to answer that question. We've been trained. And so we start telling ourselves we're not that good. We're not that smart. We're not that great. We probably shouldn't have done it in the first place. I should eat a bug. And the problem is there's nobody to say, well, don't do it again and leave. It's just you. And so you can find yourself just keeping going and keeping going and keeping going. And you wind up saying crap to yourself like, if you could find a village that didn't already have an idiot, that'd be a perfect place for you. In fact, you can find a village, they don't have an idiot, but what they do have is a hole in the ground. And next to the hole in the ground, there's a rock. And you can climb into the hole and pull the rock in on top of yourself. That'd be the place for you. You don't have to let it get that dark. You can just ask yourself better questions. Because at the end of the day, you don't care why you did it that way the last time. You want to know how you can do it better the next time. And if you ask yourself, how can I do this better next time? And this is where I explain the hypnotic model of the mind, because this is a really good time to talk about the critical faculty, because just about everybody you're going to work with knows about the conscious and the unconscious mind. People don't know there's that third part to that model. And you can explain that there's this filter and it's malleable and it changes. And if you ask yourself a question that you don't know the answer to, it's got to adjust itself so you can find out. And so if you ask yourself, how can I do this better next time? And you truly don't know, it has to allow you to be aware to different kinds of information, different kinds of sensory data, so you can draw new conclusions. And hopefully, eventually, if you live long enough, you'll get the answer to that question. Or you'll get bored with it and move on. That happens too. It doesn't really matter. As long as the problem doesn't bother you anymore, that's a win. At least that's what I think. And finally, we do this thing, and I don't know who invented it. I mean, Melissa Tiers does it. David Snyder does it. Lots of people do it. I suspect there's probably some Tibetan monk from the 50s who originated it somewhere, and some backpacker picked it up, and I don't know. Spinning. Just about everybody's experienced that. And if a person is capable of comprehending the idea that a thought can lead to an emotional feeling that can lead to a physical sensation, again, my client tonight, not so much, you can have a lot of fun with that. You can have them find the feeling, define its space, define its shape, define its color. Take it out, move it around. Did it change color? Move it around some more, stick it back in. What color is it now? And then I tell them about going to London. And I drag this story out. I'm not going to do it for you folks here tonight, because I want the aha at the end of this at the end of this story to be such an incredible letdown that they'll be desperate for some meaning, which I provide after I give the aha moment. But for those of you who've been through Society of NLP practitioner training, and I make the difference just because there are those folks out there selling $7 practitioner trainings online. Don't get me wrong, I'm sure it's worth every penny, but I'm not entirely sure it's worth any more than that, and you shouldn't confuse it with real training. Eliciting the submodalities of an experience took us half a day in my practitioner training in London. There were 600 of us. And for those of you who, again, jargon, sorry, we do that. Somebody remembers a positive time in their life. Somebody else asks them a bunch of questions about it based upon this incredibly tedious worksheet that we're given. And in a group like that, you break up into groups of three, again, operator, observer, bathroom break. Everybody has to do each job at least once. It's a big, long list, 3 columns, 2 sides, 8-point type. There's a ton of crap on that worksheet. We've got to do it 3 times in between chit-chatting and resetting. The whole thing can take up to 4 hours. At the end of which we learned one thing. More is more, usually. I just saved you all a trip to London. I mean, not you, Michael, because you're going to go anyway. But I mean, everybody else, you don't have to go. You can if you want, but you don't have to. And all that means is that the stronger the sensory signal, the stronger the emotional impact most of the time. There's always a couple of things in every person in every group that it's backwards than what the book says it's supposed to be. And to the best of my knowledge, there's no deeper significance to that. That's just, we're all different. If we were all the same, that'd be boring. So more is more usually, and the corollary, less is less, usually. And I will tell people that I didn't used to tell people this stuff, and I didn't. But I had a client who was a school teacher, And she had this kid in her class who was incredibly disruptive. She could not stay on track with this kid in the room. It's kind of like for a lot of us back when we were in school, sometimes there'd be a substitute teacher, and sometimes some of the kids would kind of gang up on the substitute teacher. They'd get a little flustered, they lose control of the whole class. It'd be pandemonium until the bell rang. Well, this kid didn't have to wait for a sub. He could do it to his homeroom teacher, and he could do it to her every day. I had done this little exercise with her because she was coming in for weight loss. She had never been in shape. She wasn't huge by any stretch of the imagination, but she had never been anything like the size and shape she wanted to be. She was having a hard time relating to that. And after doing some of the normal stuff, she just really couldn't see herself looking the way that she wanted to look. And based on the way I was doing things back then, that was a key moment. I didn't really know what to do to get beyond that. And so I thought about something that Steve up in Canada had taught me. And I said, well, imagine a statue of yourself looking the way you want to look. Change it if it doesn't look right. Can you do that? She could do that. And I spent a lot of time on that statue. I spent a lot of time really having her take in all the details from the outside of that statue until she was best buddies with that statue. And only when that happened did I have her step into the statue. It was still the statue, but she was seeing it fully associated in the moment. It was still a statue, though. So maybe not fully associated, but close enough for jazz. And for the first time in her life, she was able to truly believe, not just know logically, rationally, but believe that she could actually look and feel like that. And she was really curious about how we'd been able to do that. Well, we were at the end of our time. I had somebody waiting out in the waiting room. I'm trying to get her scheduled for next week. And I know that I gave her like a 30-second version of the London story. And I know that I said more is more usually. And I only know that I said less is less usually too by what happened the next week. Because the next week she came back and she's all smiling and she's all happy. And I'm thinking, oh, cool, she lost a ton of weight. Nothing breeds success like success. This is going to be a great session. Things are going to go really, really well. And she had lost some weight, but that's not why she was smiling. And I should point out, she wasn't a really naturally, at least as far as I could tell, smiley kind of person. But she was so happy because she'd gotten an idea when she left my office. And by the way, just to set this up, she had never heard, nor had I ever told her anything about Kendrick Cleveland prior to what I'm about to tell you, because some of you are going to recognize what she did. She came up with this on her own. She told me about James, the kid in her class. She told me how big of a problem he was, how she was the senior teacher in her grade. That's how she got stuck with this jerk, and she didn't know what to do. She was thinking about retiring. For the first time in her life, there was a kid in her class that she couldn't handle. And as she left my office that day with the words less is less usually ringing in her ears, she thought, maybe I could do something with that. She thought about that. And she thought about that all that night. She thought about that all that morning when she was driving into work. She walks into her classroom and there's James in the front row center, because that's where the teacher book tells you to put bad kids. That was a mistake on her part. I mean, that didn't keep him from doing anything. That just let him get a better aim at her as far as I was concerned. But nobody asked me. And as she begins teaching her lesson, as James starts gearing up to be James, she imagines him starting to shrink down, getting really, really small. She didn't turn him blue. She didn't know about that. She turned him black and white. Yeah, floated him over the head of the other kids in the classroom, all the way to the back of the room. In the back of the room, there were some shelves, and on those shelves, there were some jars. And she imagined taking a jar and opening up the jar and stuffing James down inside the jar and screwing the lid on top. Let us assume there were holes in the lid of the jar, but it really doesn't matter because this was all happening inside of her imagination. The thing that does matter is that as soon as she did that, she was able to ignore his butt. She was able to give her attention to the rest of the class because she was paying attention to them. The other kids in the class were paying attention to her. And because James wasn't getting any attention or any feedback from his little buddies, James did something that he hadn't done all year. James, shut up. And this is when I knew I needed to teach this to people. And I tell people, don't worry about getting the technique as I explained it to you perfect. And I tell her about a thing. This really happened. About a fellow that I saw a couple of years ago. I always say it was a few months ago. 36 is a few, because that's not lying, but you don't want to tell somebody, yeah, a couple of years ago. No, let's keep it fresh, keep it recent, keep them thinking about in the now, be in the moment. A few months back, I was working with this guy. Now, his thing was anger management. And we'd had a good first session. I explained all this to him just the way I explained it to you. He came in for session 2. I asked him how things had gone. He said, things went great. Building up a little expectation that he's a client just like you. Things are going to go great for you too. We want people to believe this stuff. I learned that from somebody. Hypnosis is all BS or some BS like that. I forget who said that. Anyway, he said, yeah, things were going pretty great until a couple of days ago. My boss was really getting on me at the end of the day. And I get out to my truck and I'm starting to feel that feeling. And I remembered what you told me. And he begins to describe one of these submodality exercises. And about a third of the way into it, he starts like veering off into a different one. And then he starts talking about something that I have never said to anybody ever. I never even thought about it. I don't know where this guy's going. And I'm about to say to him, well, the reason why you didn't get the results you were looking for. And I should point out that when I'm working with the client, I always try to aim my language in the direction that we want to go rather than in the direction that we want to get away from. So I try not to talk about failure. I talk about not achieving success or not achieving the success you were looking for. Regardless, I didn't actually utter those words. I'm glad I didn't, because the next thing out of his mouth was, and it worked great. And I'm like, yeah, that did. You're doing great. You keep doing that. You're doing perfectly. Because the thing that matters isn't exactly how you apply this basic concept. It's just that you know it and you can do something with it. You don't have to make a pony out of the Play-Doh. You can make a cowboy. You can make a hat. You can make a fence. As long as you're playing with the Play-Doh, you're doing it right. As long as you're putting the Legos together to build something that's useful for you more than just a handful of Legos, you're doing it right. That's the way I look at all this stuff. Call it hypnosis, call it NLP, call it design human engineering, call it whatever you're going to call it. It's a bunch of concepts that we use to build bigger stuff. And sometimes people spend a lot of time on that other stuff. Quite a number of years ago, there was somebody who was offering a 2 or 3 day in-person class in custom swish patterns. They were charging like $1,000 for this. And if I could remember the person's name, Michael, I'd know that you'd know who they were. It was one of those people who had been around for a long time. I want to say Christopher Tomasulo, but it wasn't him. I've got another story about him. But it's nothing bad. But I was told this in my NLP practitioner training. And the way we approached things there was a little bit more fundamentals, because my NLP practitioner trainer was a salesman by trade. He learned NLP to be better at sales, not to be an NLP trainer, which meant that he had a very different perspective on this stuff than a lot of people do. And so he said, let's just go around the room here, because the promise of this $1,000 class is that you're going to walk away with at least 6 custom swish patterns. Just based upon what you've learned, just come up with something here real quick. And there were 15 of us in the room. We came up with 35. And when you know how the pieces work, or if you have a sense, an idea, screw around with it. No one says that you have to make the Death Star out of the Death Star Lego kit. You can make whatever the heck you want if it makes you happy. Richard Bandler has said a bunch of stuff over the years, and one of the things that I actually agree with is if you're using NLP to help you get what you want, you're doing it right. More or less, that's what he said. Also, he said NLP is whatever I say it is. Him, not me. So those things are contradictory, I realize. Welcome to our world. But I want these people to learn how to do this. Everything that I do in the office, I try to have it do it double duty at the very least. When I first met David Snyder, I overheard him talking to somebody about martial arts. And I've done a little bit of that. And he was saying something kind of interesting. And that's how I engaged him in conversation. The thing he was talking about was how in the original way that karate was taught, blocks and strikes weren't separate things. If you were blocking a punch, you were trying to hurt them while you did it. And as you hit somebody, you were trying to prevent them from hitting you. So everything did everything all at once. And a couple of years ago, much more recently, Richard Nongard said something interesting that I really latched onto, which was that he used his induction to teach people how to relax, which is a beautiful thing. I love that. And so I started thinking, well, how can I do sort of the same thing with what I'm doing? I'm teaching people all these resourceful skills, but I'm learning as I'm teaching to them the things they're good at, the things they have trouble with, the things that they just can't do at all, the things they can do, but doesn't really seem to impact anything for them. And that's going to impact how I give them suggestions. If if they don't respond well to visual imagery, I'm not going to be telling them stories that have a lot of pictures in them. I'm going to be telling them stories with sounds. I'm going to be telling them stories with feelings. And I love telling stories, so I can probably come up with something that's going to work. James's superpower was being able to get his teacher off her track no matter what mood she was in or what was going on. My superpower is coming up with metaphorical stories on the fly. I don't know how I do it. I'd love to be able to teach people how to do it, but I haven't figured out how I do it. So if that ever happens, I'll let you know. I'll have a class. I'll sell it to you. It'll be worth it. But I don't know how I do it yet. So I'm not going to try to explain it until I've got that figured out. The thing that I teach these people how to do, these tools teach me how their mind works. I'm going to teach them how to hypnotize themselves in their very first session. I'm not going to tell them that because they won't believe me if I told them that. You got to believe it. But I'm going to take them through a hypnotic process. I'm going to condition them to the sound of my voice because I work in headphones. And if I get my microphone right close to my mouth, you can just imagine hearing this voice and relaxing a little bit more easily, a little bit more quickly than you did just a moment ago. And I'm going to get them conditioned to that. I'm going to get them conditioned to the music that I play in the background. So the next time they sit down in that chair, they're going to have all of the anchors they need to bring back that hypnotic experience. Because I think, as we all know, because we've all been hypnotized a whole bunch, that when you've been hypnotized a whole bunch, going into hypnosis is more or less a choice. And when you know how to get there, it becomes an easier thing to do. By the time we're done, I do tell them, would you like to know how to hypnotize yourself? Yeah, you've been doing it for the past 3 sessions. Let me show you what we did. And I'll take them through it because session 1, I use the element induction on people. Session 2, assuming session 1 went well, session 2, I'm going to say, using many, many more words, sit back in the chair, listen to my voice, listen to the music, remember how it feels to be hypnotized. And that works because I taught them how to relax during that first session, in addition to working on the problem that they had. I taught them how to hypnotize themselves. They're going to walk out of my office having had an amazing experience. They're going to walk out of my office knowing how to do some things that they didn't even know were possible to do, much less being able to do them. when they walked in. And they're going to leave my office believing the thing that they had been hanging on to by their fingernails when they walked in, which is they actually believe they can change. Because again, somebody said something about how hypnosis is all BS, and she might be right. So again, your mileage may vary.
This seems like it might be a perfect place to see if there are any questions. And Jeffrey has promised us 3 techniques. We're going to have time for those 3 techniques with explanations, yes?
Yes, we've already sort of touched on them a little bit.
I thought so, but if you'd spell it out, that would be great. Are there any questions before we move on to that? Okay.
Okay, fantastic. So I'm going to go through this. Actually, maybe it would be good if I had a volunteer. Does anybody want to do that? I can do this without a volunteer, but if it's too late and everybody's too tired and you just want me to keep talking, God knows I can do that. So, okay, that's what we're doing. All right. So first thing, it's the pictures. This is how I explain it. Trying to think of what the setup is. It's like trying to explain to somebody how you tie your shoes. But I talk about deletion, distortion, and generalization, the things we do where we don't get perception perfect, but mostly that's okay. We limit the amount of stuff that makes it to conscious awareness by multiple different means. That's good. We're overwhelmed by signal all the time. I just drove past the place where my great-grandfather's farm used to be today. True story. The farm's not there anymore. The hill that the farm stood on isn't there anymore, but there's a nice warehouse in its place. I know where it used to be. That's the important thing. I think about that man's life a lot, and this is a story that I tell them. How his day was filled with hard work, but each day was probably more or less the same. I doubt that he went more than 50 miles past his birthplace his entire life. I point out that in the room where my office is, I have lots of books with colorful covers, and yes, a lot of them were picked just because the titles seemed appropriate. The books that I actually read are not in the office, they're at home. But there are colors in that room that my great-grandfather probably never saw because the inks and dyes hadn't been invented. It's good that we delete, distort, and generalize the information that we take in. You walked into my lobby from the hallway, having never seen that particular door before because you have a generalized idea of door. You know that there's an openy-closey thing on one side. There's some swingy things on the other side. You work the openy-closey thing. The swingy things work. The door opens. You enter the room. You don't have to reverse engineer every door you came to. I don't know where you went to school, but I'm willing to bet that where you ate lunch had hard floors, hard walls, a great big high ceiling, sound bounced around there like a ping pong ball inside of a lotto machine. It was objectively quite loud. Nonetheless, you were able to have a conversation with the people at your table. I used to say your friends at your table. I quit doing that because some people don't have friends in school. So there are usually people at your table, though. And sometimes you have to talk to them. Certainly, they were talking to each other. You were able to have a conversation with the people at your table, just like everybody else was having conversations with the people at their table. That's why it was so loud in there. But it was as if all those other conversations were kind of pushed back, unless somebody says something that even sounds like your name, and all of a sudden your attention goes over there. Talk a little bit more about the critical faculty and how that all works and why it lets through some stuff and not other stuff. A person can live next to the train tracks. If somebody's more or less my age or thereabouts, I reference that scene in the Blues Brothers movie where Jake and Elwood are back at Elwood's apartment, and Jake says, "How often does the train go by?" And Elwood said, "So often you won't even notice it." And even if you've never seen that movie, you can relate to that because eventually that just becomes part of the background. You expect it. Your mind, your neurology learns that signal isn't important. And so we delete that. We distort the surroundings in the cafeteria. We generalize the door without having to think about it. And even though you client person are not getting the results that you want out of life right now, which is why you're here, the results you are getting consistently, that means you're good at it. And you do this stuff all the time. And with just the tiniest amount of practice, you can do it consciously. Would you like to know how? They always say yes. I say, great. Are you any good at making pictures in your head? Everybody's good enough to do this, unless you're like truly one of those people who cannot make pictures in your mind. And we can talk about whether that's a real thing or not. But until you run into one of those people, this works. That's the easy part of the question. Part two of the question is, can you think of somebody that you don't particularly care for? And before they jump in with, oh yeah, you say, and it's somebody that if you felt better about them, it would be okay. So like not somebody you work with who you know you have to be on your guard against because they're going to stab you in the back the first chance you get, but maybe somebody like that you used to work with, somebody who's just a little off-putting for whatever reason. Usually most people can think, yes. Great. Close your eyes. Get a picture of that person in your head. When you've got that picture, nod your head. This next part, the way that I phrase this is kind of important. Now, think about the feeling that you have about this person, the negative feeling that you have. I don't bother to try to put a name on it. The negative feeling that you have about this person. Now, don't tell me your answer yet. You've got to say that right up front or they will. Don't tell me your answer, but on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the most, rate the strength of the negative feeling you have about this person. Don't tell me the answer. You can't say that enough times. Just hold it in your mind. I'm going to ask you about it later. When you've got the number in your mind on that scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the most, nod your head. Eventually they'll nod their head. It's like, great. I'm going to ask you to do some things with this picture. Do your best. There's no such thing as perfect. A lot of these people are in there because of negative self-talk. You don't want to create another situation like that for them. You tell them it is okay to do as well as you're able to do. And they do. If what I'm describing is how the picture already is, then leave it the way it is. But otherwise, do your best to do the change that I'm describing. Everybody eventually always says yes. Okay. First thing, take this picture, make it a still picture rather than a moving picture. So a photo, not a movie. I always try to describe things at least 2 different ways so that there's no confusion. They know what I'm talking about. That's a technique that I learned from, of all people, Mark Savard, who would do what he calls the triple when he's describing something in his act, because you want your volunteers to know what the heck you're talking about, or you're going to have a dull show. And if you've ever been to his show, you can't anymore. He's retired now, but he had the stage show at Planet Hollywood back in Vegas, back before COVID. One of the things he always did in his show was that he selected one of his volunteers to be the person who, when receiving the suggestion, would turn into a member of the cast of Riverdance. Now, again, most of us are old enough that we remember Riverdance, but that was a long time ago, folks. I hate to break it to you, but it was. And up until 2020, Mark was still doing the same skit. So he would say, you're a river dancer. You're an Irish step dancer. And if they didn't know what that was, and there's no guarantee they would, you jump up and down, your arms are stuck to your sides, and your feet flip around like there's Mexican jumping beans in your shoes. That's how he described it. One of those 3 descriptions is going to hit. They're going to know what they're supposed to do with one of those 3 descriptions. So whenever there's something that I want to be clear about, and I'm not entirely clear that the one way is going to do it, I'll describe it 2 ways. Bam, bam. That's just the way I talk, it sounds like. So make it a still picture rather than a moving picture, a photo, not a movie. Make it a black and white photo. Put this photo into a big, thick, plain black picture frame, like a certificate frame. I don't say this next part out loud. Like the certificates that are on the wall right behind my head that you were looking at just moments ago. That's just happenstance, but I use it. Center it in the middle of your field of vision. They nod every time they do one of these things. I want to make sure I'm not getting ahead of them. Now, imagine that using your thoughts, you're pushing that picture off into the distance. It's moving further and further away, appearing smaller and smaller. As things move further away, they appear smaller. It moves far enough away, it starts to get a little out of focus. It starts to get a little blurry. You want to remind them what they're working with. So you've got this black and white still photo in the big, thick, plain black picture frame, centered in the middle of your field of vision, moving further and further away, getting smaller and smaller, blurrier and blurrier. Eventually, what you're winding up with is this little black smudge way out on the horizon. It's like somebody picked a piece of lint off of a charcoal colored sweater, stuck it way out there on the horizon. Yeah, I use sound effects. I'm fun like that. It's so far away, so small, so blurry, that if you were to push it any further away, it would completely disappear. Before you do that, though, once you've got that black and white still picture in the big, thick, plain black picture frame centered in the middle of your field of vision, so far away, so small, so blurry, that it is just that little dot way out there on the horizon, go back to that 1 to 10 scale. Think about how you feel about that person now. And when you have that number in mind, take a nice big deep breath in, and as you're letting it out, go ahead and open your eyes. Now, this is when you ask them, what was the number that we started with? You hope the number was higher than 5. I will sometimes say the person that you're thinking about, it should be at least a 7 or an 8. But sometimes I don't want to take the time for that because you can make it work with smaller numbers. It just works better with bigger numbers. What was the number we started with? They'll tell you. What was the number we wound up with? They'll tell you. Ideally, that's a smaller number. If not, you learned something. That wasn't a failure. You learned you probably shouldn't be using visual imagery with that person because it's not going to be that impactful for them. You ask them, was anything about that difficult? Was anything complicated? They're going to say no. You say, great. Now, let me ask you something. And I'll ask them about are you one of those people who beat yourself up, who ask yourself, why did you do that? And then you tell yourself horrible lies about yourself. Just to throw that in there, because the next thing that I'm going to do, and sadly, I've been working a lot with athletes lately. I've developed this niche just purely by accident. Sometimes these things happen. I work with a lot of young gymnasts. This next technique does not work with young gymnasts because it requires a certain familiarity with popular culture, and they don't have it because they have no lives. They work too hard. So I asked them, did you watch cartoons when you were a kid? Don't try to spoil the aha, but did you watch cartoons when you were a kid? Assuming they said yes, we can go with this. Do you ever find yourself playing back things that people said to you in the past that bother you, things that were unkind, perhaps even untrue, and certainly not useful to you today? Just about everybody says yes. I say, would you like to not be bothered by that anymore? Everybody says yes to that. Can you think about a particular one of those things that you'd like to deal with? That usually takes a little longer, but eventually they get there. Close your eyes, think about that thing. Now, I don't need to know who's saying it. I don't need to know what's being said. And I'll tell them that. I want them to feel safe. All I need to know is the voice you're hearing their voice, your voice, somebody else's voice, or can you not tell? I really don't care what the answer is. I just want them to be thinking about it. They'll tell me. Does the voice seem to be coming from in your head, near your head, someplace else, or can you not tell? Again, I don't much care what the answer is. They're going to tell me. Are you left-handed or right-handed? They're going to tell me. That's an easy one. I'm going to say, okay, I want you to take that voice and I want you to move it just temporarily over the top of whatever their non-dominant hand shoulder is. So if they're left-handed, I'm going to have them move it over the top of their right shoulder, right in line with your ear hole. And I want you to do one more thing. I want you to take that voice and I want you to turn it into the voice of Daffy Duck. And I'm going to say it just that way, building up that anticipation and the big reveal is Daffy Duck. And if you've built the tension right, you get this big smile on their faces like, that's ridiculous. That's what you want. Because you want them hearing these unkind words being delivered with this ridiculous tonality where they think that's stupid to think that. You're going to have some more fun with that. You're going to have them take that non-dominant hand. You're going to have them make a fist, stick it out in front of them, stick the thumb straight up in the air. And you're going to say, no, we're going to employ a little cartoon physics here because, sometimes in cartoons, when things get further away, they actually get smaller. So what we're going to do is that Daffy Duck is now going to drop down onto your shoulder. He's going to start marching down towards your thumb. And as he moves further and further away, he's getting smaller and smaller. In cartoons, when things get smaller and smaller, the voices get higher and higher. And sometimes I can do that not quite so loud. Sorry about that. And Daffy's marching down towards your thumb, saying all of these horrible, mean, nasty things to you. He's climbing your thumb like he's ascending Everest. And I'll do the visual gestures because even though their eyes are closed, it makes it easier for me to tell the story. And they're getting right on top of your thumbnail. They're going to jump up and down. And when you realize that you cannot possibly take seriously what Daffy Duck says to you, go ahead, take a deep breath in, let it out, open your eyes. One last thing. I've just got a couple of minutes here. You know how sometimes you have a thought, that thought leads to a feeling, that feeling leads to a physical sensation in your body? If you've done well with the first two exercises, they'll say yes. Is there a time that you can think of? Come up with a particular thing. Find the feeling. Close your eyes. What color is the feeling? Next thing, language, very important. In a moment, not just now, but in a moment, because they'll get ahead of you if you let them. I'm going to ask you to reach in, grab that feeling out of your body, pull it out, hold it out in front of you in both hands, and await further instructions, because if you don't do that, they're going to take it and throw it away. You don't want them to do that. Get them to hold it out in front of them. Ask them, did it change color? Maybe it did, maybe it didn't. Doesn't really matter. It's turning in a particular direction. I don't know what direction it is, but figure it out and force it to turn in the other direction. Get it moving faster. You want their hands flying. And get it moving so fast that it can't possibly go back to the way it was before. And only when you know it can't possibly go back to the way it was before, slam it back in. What color is it now? How else is it different? And you let them talk. You ask them if any of it was complicated. You ask them if it was difficult. And if you want to, feel free to steal my story about the teacher and the anger management guy. You don't have to say that they're your stories. You can say that they're my stories, or you can say that they're your stories. I don't care. We call those teaching tales. They're not lies. They're teaching tales. There's a difference.
Jeffrey, you did it. You gave us the 3 you promised. You gave us the explanation. You did it right, exactly on time. Thank you very much. And by the way, if you want to get a hold of Jeffrey, if you've got questions or something like that, you can always get him at jeff@peakperformancehypnosis.com. Or you can just go to his website, peakperformancehypnosis.com. And I'm sure that'll get you to him and find out more about him as well.
Absolutely. And in fact, if you go to peakperformancehypnosis.com/peer, P-E-E-R, you can schedule a 20-minute phone call with me, no cost, and we'll talk about whatever it is you want to talk about.
How about that? That's a really good deal, Jeffrey. Thank you so much. It's been fun. And yes, you're quite entertaining. Now we'd like for everybody to open your mics up and give him the send-off he deserves. Let me remind you to join us next month for the virtual chapter holiday buffet. See you then. Jeffrey, thank you so much. Open your mics and give him a big round.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's really great.
Thanks for having me.
Really well done. Thanks.
We appreciate it, Jeff.
That was
Thank you very
amazing.
much.
Thank you, Jeff.
See you soon.
Mhm.
Bye.